Well, probably a good time to welcome people who are coming in at this point. Really appreciate folks attending, and also really appreciate Jeff, Tony, and Rick who are going to share a little bit with us today about Voltage Valley. And as I was kind of joking at the beginning before we get started, that you three are living, breathing, discussing, building in this Voltage Valley, which is at least from like the Columbus, rest of Ohio perspective, I feel like we've heard about it the past year or two. And so I'm really looking forward to having a conversation that hopefully can dig a little bit deeper, both to learn a little bit how this has happened and where this has come from, but then also, what's going on, because there's a couple companies that are always in the headlines, it seems like, the bigger ones. But Tony's one example. Rick works with a bunch, and Jeff's company reports on the others. There's a whole bunch of momentum happening. And so I guess to start, Jeff, let's kick it over to you. If you want to just share who you are, where you're at in the Voltage Valley, and kind of the perspective that you're coming at it from.
Fantastic. Thanks for having us here today. We're thrilled to share what's happening in Voltage Valley. And a quick teaser for tomorrow. We're not going to talk about my days as a key grip at the Ohio State Fair, working the Sale of Champions, right? That's just have to tune in tomorrow to the Ohio Tech Report on LinkedIn to catch that, because I am a former resident of Columbus, graduate of the Ohio State University, got my undergrad there, but came back to Voltage Valley here about 2 years ago, and I'm a boomerang, and the Youngstown Publishing Company, which publishes the Business Journal, locally owned and operated media company, as well as entertainment, sports, and an advocacy platform called The Brain Gain. And thrilled to be joined by Tony and Rick today, because they're the ones that are getting it done here in Voltage Valley. Two great examples of two individuals with organizations behind them, really just focused on this community in the Mahoning Valley, which it's an iconic community known for being the buckle of the Rust Belt between Cleveland and Pittsburgh. That's really undergoing a significant transformation. So I have the opportunity here at the local media entity, the Business Journal, to report on all things Voltage Valley and all the development and innovation. But I really have to feel like Rick is a much more qualified individual to speak to everything that's happening from that standpoint. So, so I'm going to toss it over to Rick. And Chris, unless you want to moderate in another direction.
And this is why I love doing Voltage Valley stuff, because I hardly ever end up talking, and like you guys have like such a great rapport of just bouncing back and forth. And so that is absolutely perfect. So Rick, why don't you introduce yourself and share what you're up to at BRITE?
Well, I just want to say Tony has a bit of a boxing background, and I'm just like 10 years out of the Army and kind of overweight. We all know that Jeff is the best looking out of all of us.
Hands down. That, yeah, undisputed.
Yeah. So just want to make sure that everybody's clear on that. So Jeff, thanks so much. And, I think the work that you do from your seat is some of the most important work that's getting done out there. You tell the stories of the people that are doing the real work. And I end up being in between the people that are doing the real work and the stories. And so I get to see both sides of it. And it's a blast here. So I'm president and CEO of BRITE Energy Innovators, and we're actually a statewide organization, and also now do some work in Pittsburgh and Morgantown, West Virginia. And so it's really cool to be located and headquartered and be the only energy incubator in the state, but be located right here in the Mahoning Valley and what we've redubbed as Voltage Valley. I think it's oftentimes better to be lucky than good. We say that in the Army and other places a lot. But the Mahoning Valley has a rich and strong history in the automotive industry. The first Packard came off the line here in Warren, Ohio in 1899, made the first patent for the steering wheel happened right here. And so we've been doing this car thing for a while. But a lot of people don't know that, Packard eventually turned into Packard Electric and Delphi, and now Aptiv has a research center here. And Aptiv has had a research center here for 20 years. And if you're not familiar with Aptiv, they're doing some of the most interesting work in charging infrastructure, especially wireless charging for electric vehicles, as well as autonomous driving, happening right here in Warren, Ohio. Other things that you don't know about is, Tata Steel, or the Thomas Steel Strip, has been producing battery casings here for about 50 years. And so like we've always kind of been a part of this electrification space. And it just so happened that GM decided, hey, we're going to pick up and leave. And our community came together and said, well, you can't just leave. You've built this community and we're built around this thing. What do we do? And so we had, just being the only energy incubator in the state, a little bit of luck. And that happened with one of the largest battery plants in the country, being co-located right next to the former GM plant, which is the Altium and LG Chem joint venture, GM and LG Chem joint venture called Altium. And then as I was in Denver, Colorado, I was presenting to energy incubators across the country, just about how cool it was to start a business, to start an energy company in the Midwest, and what opportunities that we had and the strengths that we had. By the way, it's still hard as hell to raise capital here for clean tech companies, and Tony can tell you about that, but I'm going to fix that next, but that's neither here nor there. So telling all of my friends from Los Angeles and Boston and Denver and all over the place, and they're looking at me like, what do you mean you help companies raise this much money and all of that? Like, how did you do that there? And it's like, well, we work a little harder. It's a little bit cheaper. And honestly, did I say we work a little bit harder? And so, looking at that, and I'm standing there talking to them, and somebody's just like, oh my gosh, Rick, you're not going to believe this. President Trump just tweeted about an electric vehicle truck company locating at the Lordstown facility. And he's saying electric vehicles are good. And everybody's just like, oh, and I'm like, what is going on? I have no idea. And so, seeing that the opportunities that we have with Lordstown Motors, who eventually located just down the road, Altium, it's important that we look at what the supply chain really is, both for electric vehicles, batteries, in the clean tech space. And so, we went out and we're just looking at how do we make sure that we have an important role, not only to play in Ohio, but to play in the country. One of the things that I discuss frequently and I'm very passionate about it is the supply chain, but it's also American competitiveness. From an innovation standpoint, or from a manufacturing standpoint, like right here in Ohio, we built the free world. Like you look at the steel that's in the towers in New York, and every car that's come off the line in Detroit, the steel came from here, the tires came from Akron, the glass came from Toledo. We've been a part of this thing. We've been building the free world. And the only way that we're going to continue competing with China in what is going to be the next space is in electric vehicles is if we co-locate innovation with manufacturing. And so that story, I think, has started to come alive. And, when we look at, well, what is the tangible outcomes of that? I'll hand it over to my friend, Tony Frazone, who's next to me on my screen, but might not actually be next to me.
Well, and Tony, if you could do the intro, and then we'll dive back into some of the conversation, because one thing I'll mention to folks is we hope that this is interactive, and so if there's questions, throw it in the chat. People are also dropping their LinkedIn, so thank you, or just hit the little the emoji hand raise. Would love to work folks into the conversation. So Tony, welcome. Thank you. And you have an incredible story. I feel like we talked like 6 months ago, and it was like a random just first intro call. And the next thing I know, you're like cutting ribbons with Rick in Mahoning Valley. So I'm sure you've been a little busy. So what have you been up to?
Yeah. So Tony Frazone, co-founder and CEO of Czar Power. What a great question. I mean, it's been a wild ride over the last 6 months and last kind of 6 years since we stood up. So kind of really brief on my background. The Czar journey for me actually began, strangely enough, in northern Afghanistan. I was not lost, believe it or not. I was there on purpose. I was there as an engineer officer looking for improvised explosive devices that were targeting convoys. And something like 70 or 80% of all convoys at the time across Iraq and Afghanistan were fuel convoys. Shockingly, as it turns out, you need a tremendous amount of fuel to wage war, and fuel for generators and fuel for military vehicles. So I'm out there in one of those aha moments that only like suffering can kind of get you. You're out there, sucking in the heat with my guys. It's 110 or whatever, and you figure, hey, this is pretty stupid. There has to be a better way to do this. There has to be a better way to incorporate kind of solar, which is baking us right now, and into our power and into our kind of electrified transportation. So I get back from Afghanistan late 2014. Kind of fortunately, I linked up with a really good friend of mine at the time. I'd known him for a couple of years, Nelson Wang, and at the time he was a PhD student at MIT. And he thought he'd figured out a way to combine both of these things that I was kind of looking at getting involved in: electric vehicles, specifically like electric vehicle charging, and solar through a solar inverter, and how to kind of bake those two things together into one system to kind of attack a lot of the problems with EV adoption, the slow charge time and expensive chargers to get anything fast. And then also, how do you also incorporate both energy from the grid, but also renewable energy into that charging solution? So, obviously it's better to drive an electric vehicle than a kind of an ICE vehicle, but you're still pulling energy, from, it could be a coal burning power plant, right? Again, way better than an internal combustion engine. But we thought we could kind of push the envelope a little bit and kind of incorporate solar and renewables into that, DC fast charging. So that kind of kicked off a wild road. We stood up the business in 2015 when, 3 people in the world were driving electric vehicles, and, solar wasn't a fringe technology, but it certainly hadn't gone mainstream. But we made a lot of early bets that, the technology, culture, emphasis, money, like the political winds would all ultimately blow in this direction. And luckily enough for us, it did. So end of March, I got out of the Army, and I kind of, a couple months before that, I was looking at, okay, where are we going to land? We incorporated out of Boston. Massachusetts State was awesome to us. We were the #1 clean tech company in Massachusetts in 2019. That came with a grant. So Massachusetts State treated us really well, but it was kind of personally important to me to see if we could come to Ohio, kind of not do the cliche thing where you start a tech company and you kind of run away to the coast, but to come back to kind of a region of the country that a lot of people overlook and plant our flag in the ground here and build something great. So that's where, Chris, you and I first got kind of connected. You gave me a short list of very good recommendations, and one of them was Rick. So Rick and I immediately kind of kicked it off, and ultimately I'm in Northeast Ohio because of him, because of kind of his vision and his leadership and what he has going on. And we're looking forward to really making a ding in the universe together.
That's really cool. And I guess to kind of set the stage again, and please, if people have questions or want to hop in with your own, just hit the raise hand and we'll bring you to the stage, if you will. But maybe, Jeff, we can kind of bring you back in at this point. So to kind of give the lay of the land, if you will. So there's kind of the big companies: Lordstown Motors, the electric truck manufacturer, the LG Chem, GM, which is really big because I believe, and Rick, you could probably correct me if I'm wrong, that GM is committed to going all electric by 2035. Is that right? Yeah. And so, having this plant in Ohio doing this is pretty incredible. Those are like the kind of the big players, correct? That are the kind of the big ones in town. And then, then we can talk a little bit more about what Rick and the BRITE team are doing.
Right. So as Rick referred to, General Motors proper, we used to build the Chevy Cruze, the little 4-door sedan, in Lordstown. They vacated a couple years ago. Lordstown Motors was the first mover. So they built electric fleet vehicles, pickup trucks. And they were the first mover to they were the initial spark of this current Voltage Valley movement. So they acquired rights and access to the General Motors production plant called, the Lordstown facility. And so they're a pure startup, roots in Workhorse, which is a Cincinnati-based organization. And you'll probably know Workhorse has been the company competing for the United States Postal Service contract for electric postal vehicles. So that was a first mover probably about 18 months ago, if not longer. And correct me if I'm wrong, Rick, once we get to that point. But then the bigger momentum shift is now what's called Altium Cells LLC. Altium Cells LLC is a standalone, independent, massive startup because General Motors and LG Chem, General Motors out of Detroit, obviously, and LG Chem out of South Korea, formed a joint venture, which then stood up Altium Cells. And Altium Cells is building a $2.3 billion manufacturing facility here in Lordstown, Ohio, which is right on the border of Trumbull and Mahoning County. So right like dead center heart of the Mahoning Valley. And they currently have about anywhere from 500 to more trades on site today, literally building a massive production facility. And I mean, when I drive by every couple weeks or so, and it's insane the footprint that this project is taking up. But it's a $2.3 billion project for phase one. Word on the street is that they acquired more land, that there'll be a second phase of development. I've become friends with the head of recruiting for Altium Cells, and he has a big job ahead of him. He's scaling these recruiting classes that start in the 10s, then to the 20s, groups of recruiting classes. The goal is to have 1,500 people employed at this Altium Cells plant by the middle of 2022. And these are all, advanced, or I'll call them modern manufacturing jobs. They're autonomous. You're not turning wrenches. You're making decisions. You're monitoring equipment. You're doing diagnostics. It's a modern manufacturing facility. So that's the big foundation. That's the big focus of Voltage Valley.
And
then
Jeff,
I just today.
Could I hop in real quick?
Yeah.
So I guess to kind of put it in perspective, do you know how many, and Rick or Tony, you all may know too, but how many for this GM shift to all electric by 2035, how many of these plants will there be across the US, or how many, how much, how big of a role is this for what GM's doing?
Well, there's Lordstown. They named Tennessee as their second plant.
Yep.
So there's a big project happening in Tennessee as well, which is another, GM friendly.
Yeah.
And I think that's the thing. And the Altium Cells people tell me all the time, it's like people call us GM, but we're really Altium Cells, whose parent, and it's funny, they're truly a startup because the head of recruiting, who was the first employee number one, he had to buy his own payroll software. He had to buy his own laptop. So even though they have massive parents,
right,
they're a startup. Now the funding is going towards the construction project right now, which is interesting. So, there's definitely a significant project happening, but it's funny on the, what I would call the administrative side of the business, recruiting and getting, kind of the operation running. It is funny to see them operate in they're in a strip mall in Lordstown right now, in like an empty room, and next door to a Subway, just in a nondescript strip mall where they're setting up shop. Now they are moving to a better location in our Eastwood Mall complex, which is a big Cafaro-owned footprint complex to do their recruiting. And then I was just going to say, and she may be on here, but Youngstown State University and Eastern Gateway Community College have both made significant strides, and they're a big driver of workforce development and upskilling and reskilling. And there is a entire division and Center for Innovation and Workforce. And so this is something we have to take very seriously. And that's really where the momentum shift that's happening on the Department of Energy is now also locating a facility here in Lordstown. I did a podcast interview with Jennifer Odo from Youngstown State University earlier today. But there's another big center being developed that will basically funded and propped up by the Department of Energy. And Rick can speak to that probably more clearly because that's right in his wheelhouse. But so there are a couple companies, big projects happening, but this is an overarching investment in this skill set, like literally just energy as a key competitive advantage.
Yeah, and it's interesting, and kind of the reason I asked about where else, because that's what I thought. I remember reading that it was like Tennessee, or maybe I was going to say Arizona, but to just kind of show the role of, it's kind of like crazy when you think about it and like wrap your head around the role that Northeastern Ohio will be playing in GM, and it kind of had me thinking of kind of a much different example, but here in Central Ohio in New Albany, there's these massive data centers for Facebook, Amazon, and Google. And I had the opportunity to tour the Facebook one right before the pandemic hit last year, or I guess, 2000 and a little over a year ago at this point. And they're just these massive facilities. Now, these will, the ones in Youngstown area will definitely employ more people, but they are massive physical investments, and they are just really big. And for like Facebook, I think it's something like, there's like 15 of them in the world, which, it's not many. A bunch of them are in like Sweden for some reasons. And then there's a couple across the US. So it's like, these are really cool stories, I feel like. But Rick, do you want to hop in and I'd love to hear more about BRITE, because it's so interesting that, as you mentioned, you're the only energy incubator. And I'm sure a lot of folks that are listening in and will tune in later for this are very familiar with Rev 1 and the role that can play, but that has a geographic focus of kind of Central Ohio. And you go down to Cincinnati, it's Cincy Tech, Dayton has theirs, Cleveland has Jumpstart. But as you said, you have the one statewide perspective for when it comes to energy and energy tech. How did BRITE start to begin with? And then what are you seeing when we look at Ohio in general for this space?
Yeah, really good questions. I want to start with a quick anecdote about the Facebook facility, though. I know I should answer your questions when you ask them, but it's an important thing. So my neighbor growing up is actually one of the people running those facilities, and she was also my first crush. And so I just want to say I'm really happy that she's doing so well in Columbus and is no longer in Northeast Ohio. I miss her horribly. Just kidding, wife. At any rate, so BRITE Energy Innovators, as I said, we're the only energy-focused incubator, and we're the only one that's statewide. It's important for a couple of reasons, because we are actually associated with the Jumpstart network here in Cleveland. However, we do work with Rev 1 and Cincy Tech and the others. And so we do that in a couple of ways. Generally speaking, when an energy company comes to one of those incubators, the first thing that they do, and a lot of times, is call us and say, hey, there's this new technology. Can you help us vet it and see if it's a good program? So we're able to have clients all across the state for that reason. And so through that funding and our free services, to be able to help mentor them through the process. The origin story, I feel like everybody needs to have a good origin story if they're going to try to be a superhero. And from BRITE's perspective, the origin story is super straightforward, and honestly, to me, funny enough, it goes back to rivalry with another county in this area. So in 2009, I think the city of Warren, where we're located, saw that there was this awesome incubator in Youngstown. And Youngstown's about 20 minutes away, and they're doing great work at the YBI and all of that's going on. And they're like, man, we want our own incubator. And so it just so happens that Congressman Tim Ryan, his office is like four buildings down here. And they said, hey, earmarks are a thing, let's get an incubator. And the community got together and they said, hey, well, we can't get just an incubator, it has to be something specific. And at the time there was the shale play going on just south of here. And they said, how about an energy incubator? As things evolved, the funny thing that happened was they had the earmark for the construction of the building, and then earmarks went away. So they could never actually pay to staff it. And so it was a long time of raising funding, matching funds to get the building put together. And it actually ended up taking about 5 years from 2010 when it was awarded to 2015 when the building was actually completed. I was hired as the first full-time CEO in 2017. And from that point forward, we really wanted to look holistically about how do we provide what I consider the best energy programming in the country, and how do we take those best practices from around the country, focus them here, first in the Mahoning Valley, and secondly across the state of Ohio, and make sure that we're giving really, really great services to our companies. And so that way, you know, we can create jobs because we're an economic development agency. We can create investment, and we can frankly create capital that can reinvest in that. And so as an energy incubator, we really exist to do just that. And it's helping folks like Tony, who relocated here from Tennessee, even though he grew up in the Akron area, to let them have an opportunity to come home and be part of what we think is a really, really strong future.
Thanks, Rick. And Tony or Jeff, feel free to hop in at any point. But do want to kind of talk about just the potential for, you know, where does this EV space go for Ohio? And, you know, maybe there's a Northeastern Ohio Voltage Valley component to it. But, you know, Jeff, you mentioned workhorses down in the Cincinnati area. And there's definitely these other, you know, kind of pockets of the state where some things will, you know, are happening. So, and opening it up to whoever, so feel free to hop in. But what are those keys that as we go these next 5, 10, 15 years for Ohio to continue expanding? Maybe Tony, you know, starting with you would be great, because perfect example, you were in Boston, Massachusetts, they treated you great, but you decided to come here. So how does Ohio potentially recruit more? And then maybe there's a secondary conversation or topic around how do we kind of build up organically from what is already here and already working?
Yeah, Chris, that's a great question. So, and you know, when Ohio for startups, you know, really pretty popular nationwide for kind of med tech, and you know that a lot. You know that better than most. You know, we have great hospitals in the state. That makes sense. The logical link is there. You know, recently the state's done a lot with SaaS companies, because I mean, and this is what COVID taught a lot of us, is that you don't really need to live. You're not beholden to one specific geographic location. You know, if people get pretty tired of, you know, paying $4,000 living in a broom closet in San Francisco, if you don't have to, right? You can come to Ohio and you can do stuff over the internet anywhere. Clean tech, electrified transportation is a little different, right? Because it's fundamentally a hardware business, and there's, you know, significant challenges to that, from raising capital, from actually being able to pull it off. I mean, it's fundamentally a very different animal than you know, an app, right? It's a completely different ballgame. You know, we're talking about global supply chain risk, you know, a lot of geopolitical issues. And we talked a lot about batteries, and this is one of them, right? Where most of them, if we just talk about lithium as an example, most of it's mined in Australia, and then a significant portion in Chile and China and Argentina. But China has the lion's share of, you know, they suck up the raw material, right, and kind of create the batteries in China. And without being, you know, too dramatic, that poses, you know, somewhat of a national security issue, right? But more importantly, it poses an economic security issue, right, with having all of that manufacturing done in China.
It's not too dramatic, Tony.
It's not yeah.
Remotely, it's very serious.
Yeah, it is very serious, right? Especially because, you know, it's not just GM. Every major auto manufacturer in the world has said that they will go fully electric by, you know, 2035, summer 2030, summer 2025, right? So the entire, there's not going to be a world in which kind of ICE vehicles survive en masse, you know, as new vehicles anywhere in the world. Obviously, at the core of all of those vehicles are a battery, right? You know, hydrogen's really far from making economic sense, especially on like a small scale, right? You can look at hydrogen for like large plays, energy storage and, applications like that. But, most likely that it won't make a whole lot of sense to do for a sedan, right? So it's going to be batteries are here to stay. So efforts like Ultium are really critical because what they do is they create kind of a center of gravity that attract folks like me, right, and my friends and network to come here, because you need something to kind of break in your favor, a big kind of 800-pound gorilla to also put their flag in the ground here, and at least a couple with Lordstown and Ultium have done that. And then from there, that attracts smaller companies, startups, attracts them to the area, gives them potential customers, investors start looking there. And every kind of little piece, every company that moves to an area adds to that gravitational pull and can pull more companies in. And I'll just give you like a specific example. This is not like aspirational. So Ultium, yes. Lordstown, yes. BRITE, yes. All right, all in the same area. They attract me, little old me in my startup, right? So we've got a team of 4 and then 3 engineering interns, so 7 in total. But my friends obviously are involved in this space. So I picked up a phone and I'm, calling one of my friends, Mac, who started a company called Agiro, which does regenerative braking for trucks, kind of creates, trucking 30% more fuel efficient, right? A tremendous carbon offset. And he's in the UK and France. Well, guess what? He's trying to come to the United States. And where do you think he's going to go? So I kind of introduce him to Rick, and he becomes affiliated with BRITE, right? And then you've got all of because it's a hardware business, you need to make things, right? Somebody has to make things. And I think the right thing to do is make it in the United States if you can. So another kind of component to this are the manufacturing jobs that are associated, as Jeff said, not like 19th century sweatshop, but modern manufacturing jobs, high paying jobs that are associated with building these hardware solutions for electrified transportation and clean energy. That's another area where now you can kind of see how this all slowly will start to build momentum and kind of attract more people, and it becomes a virtuous cycle as opposed to a vicious cycle, which I think a lot of we have in Ohio, especially Northeast Ohio. We've got some scar tissue around.
Tony, you just gave up my media release for like next month. Jeff, close your ears.
Well, Rick, something that you've mentioned, and Tony is kind of, Rick, you mentioned the American competitiveness, and Tony, you're talking about just the the geopolitical dynamics that are out there with things like electric batteries. And it's interesting because earlier this week I was speaking with a group in Oregon around tech and what's happening in their state, and semiconductors. Portland specifically is a big player in semiconductors, and that's something that we're seeing the shortages of, and kind of again those same geopolitical trends. COVID is also, we've considered supply chain, where it's like for years everything was going offshore, and then the past year said, hey, maybe we should actually still make some things in the United States. So as we think about, maybe, I don't know, Rick, if you have more thoughts on that, but that was just something interesting that, between my conversation earlier this week and what you both have kind of talked about, what do you think that role is that Ohio could potentially play in, some of these bigger trends, whether it's onshoring manufacturing, smart manufacturing that Jeff, you've mentioned, or obviously this just giant movement of one day we'll probably all be driving electric vehicles?
You're going to get me on the tirade, Chris. It's like it's going to happen, and people are going to get angry. And anyway,
well, it's a nice day, so like let's maybe keep it.
And I'll fuel it. I'll absolutely fuel it.
This isn't going to be good. No, Chris, thanks for that question. So like, I'm unbelievably passionate about frankly American exceptionalism in many ways, and so I think we learned a lot during COVID-19, which is still going on, by the way, and through this, and like what role can Ohio play? So one of the things that I'm most horribly frustrated with right now is Ohio has an enormous amount of wealth. You'd actually be, some people would be surprised by that, but if you actually look at some of the pockets of money that are here, and how did Ohioans make that wealth? They made it by building things. Also, if you look at Ohioans' investment accounts, 94% of their investments go to, you guessed it, the coasts. So if you're looking at where they're investing their time and their precious money, and specifically their risk capital, it is leaving our state, going other places, and helping them build great economies. Now, why do I bring all of these things up together? American exceptionalism, American competitiveness are how we've gained wealth, and then how we're giving wealth to the coast. It's because it's hard for companies like Tony's to raise money here when all that fund is going to the coast. So what I am going to be proposing in the coming months is a fund that is not only focused on clean tech, because I think it's one of the most important things that we can focus on as a country and as a state, as one of the fastest growing markets, fastest growing job creation markets, and that's out there right now. But how do we make sure that Ohioans know that not only can they invest in tech companies here, but that can have that trickle down effect of making sure that we're building their products here, not just here in the Voltage Valley, but here in Ohio and Pittsburgh and Detroit. How do we make sure that we do that? And that's by looking at our risk capital that is getting sent other places and asking to make sure that those impact investments, that risk investment, stays right here. And what that will actually unleash is a strong supply chain, resiliency. And it's interesting because I got asked to be on a panel earlier today for Power Clean Future Ohio. And actually the reason they asked me to be on it is because they know I believe greatly in clean tech. And they also know in my personal life, I happen to be a conservative. And they said, how does that equal the same thing? And to me, it's very, very clear why it means the same thing. It's because of American competitiveness. It's also products like Tony's that can enable people to have energy resiliency, can have energy freedom by being able to produce their own electricity in their homes and power the things that they need to power. And so when you take all of these things together, it actually makes a really good, strong economy that can be built right here in the Midwest, and that we can flourish again as a state, not just in creating new apps, but in creating new products and making sure that they're built right here by the hardworking people in Ohio. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry.
A lot there, and I'll give Jeff or Tony an opportunity to chime in. And if not, I'm sure a lot of folks on here, and we'll keep it just between those of us on this call and whoever's watching in the internet or later. But I would love, I don't know if Rick, this idea of a clean tech fund, that's interesting, and for a lot of reasons. Do you want to expand on that maybe a little?
I mean, the thesis, man, is really straightforward. It's build it here, it's build it clean, and it's build it forward. It's very straightforward. We have investors here that made their money in manufacturing and know how to manufacture and build stuff. We need to not only take their knowledge, but we need to help make them richer by investing in the talented young people like Tony that are trying to build something here that'll lean forward into that future. So, it's actually a very straightforward, simple idea. Somebody told me to keep it simple, stupid once. In my background in the Army, makes me have to, because I was an infantryman. Like Tony was an engineer, which makes him undoubtedly smarter than myself. But from my standpoint, so putting together a fund like this is interesting from a plethora of angles. And so if we look at the model that we're likely looking to do, and I'm not officially launching the fund right now, but I feel like if I say things in public, that means I have to actually do it. So Prime Impact Fund in Boston, really, really cool fund. Matthew Norden runs the clean tech aspect of it. And, I've been able to be friends with him for a couple of years now. And what they did was started out by syndicating rounds, and that's what we're doing right now. So Tony can attest to his EIR, putting him through hell, making sure that he's reaching out to all the right investors in this space. And so we're going to start by making sure that we can successfully syndicate some rounds. And then what Prime Impact did that was very interesting was, I don't know if you know about this, but foundations, and whether it's private foundations or like the Cleveland Foundation or Columbus Foundation, have a certain dollar amount that they have to invest or give away into the community. Now, a portion of that can actually be an investment if it's something that's mission aligned with them. And so what Prime did was actually ended up raising about $75 million from foundations, and that's from private family foundations like the Will and Jada Pinkett Smith Foundation, that is focused on clean tech. And the reason that it can be focused on clean tech and we can have all of these things here is because we understand as well, aligned with a lot of these foundations, that there is kind of energy inequities, specifically in urban areas and poorer areas, where if the power goes out, the power goes out way more often, which we saw in Texas, specifically in large cities, and specifically the more impoverished areas. The power not only goes out more often, but is out longer. And there's a lot of reasons for this, but by initiating a clean tech fund, we can actually make meaningful progress towards making sure that the grid for those folks is more sustainable, reliable. And so our products that are in part of our portfolio actually exist to do some of this, including Tony's. So sorry, long-winded answer again. You're killing me, Chris.
Well, thank you. A lot of interesting stuff there. And I would, the energy fund is really fascinating. So, and I love your mindset of, if you just say it, then at some point you'll actually have to do it. So
you got to speak it into existence, man.
Yeah.
Like it, BRITE was T-Bike 2 years ago, the Tech Belt Energy Innovation Center. And we had to speak something new into existence to make sure, because Tony wouldn't have came here for T-Bike. He would have been like, is this a e-bike company or what is this thing? So.
Well, Tony or Jeff, since we've heard from Rick, I don't know, I'm going to make an executive decision, kind of like a professor in a college campus or college class, like I've always wanted to, that we'll let out class early today because it's really nice and hopefully people can get some sunshine. But how about Jeff, and we'll go Tony, then Jeff. But if you have any kind of final thoughts that you want to share, just sharing about what's happening, how people can continue following along, learning more, what we can do in this really exciting space. And then I believe also Maddie is going to drop a survey, which we can do now as we're kind of hearing these things. They're just the group putting these together are doing some polls to just gather some data. Because I think there might be like a fall series for this. So if you wouldn't mind humoring us and clicking through some of these, we'd really appreciate it. It's just I think a couple questions. So we'll go Tony and then Jeff.
Yeah. So, well, first, just thank you for this. I think, programs like this, efforts like this, initiatives like this really help, right? Because they get out the word to as much as humanly possible, and that's really important because we have to broadcast. We're doing things that we should and other people should be proud of, right? I know we certainly are. So, kind of getting that speaker and kind of projecting that is very important to kind of continuing this message. And then, I'd echo a lot of what Rick said. I think, the passion that you can kind of hear, we share, because energy is at the core of so many other issues, right? And obviously I'm a little biased, but I don't think I'm myopic. There's absolutely a social justice, if you will, component to energy, specifically clean energy. And it just touches on so many things, right? We at ZARB fundamentally believe that everyone should have access to clean energy, regardless of where you live or how much money you make, right? Because, in addition to just, climate change, we also have, there's just, little things that are really not so little when you kind of look at it kind of from a global perspective, like, air quality, the economic impacts of having reliable energy, and the economic disaster if you don't, right? There's, a lot, specifically as it relates to, international development, where energy in general, clean energy specifically, is going to matter, right, more and more as the rest of the world kind of continues to develop at an astounding pace. We have this really cool opportunity, if we use telecommunications as a model, where in the West, we did Morse code, and then we laid a bunch of telephone lines and then went to cell phones. Much of the developing world kind of leapfrogged all of that, right? And they went straight to cell phones. The exact same thing will happen as it relates to energy. So rather than build this, very fragile, centrally managed system and build out this, incredibly expensive and difficult to maintain grid infrastructure, what you want to do is you want to shorten the distance from the point of energy generation to the point of consumption. And the shortest way to do that is, put it on your roof and then use it, right? And then as we kind of talked about, as electric vehicles not only just become a more attractive option, but will in the next 10, 15 years be the only option that makes any sense to anyone. All of those technologies will be part of not only the United States transition, economic and energy transition, but also the transition that we'll see throughout the entire world, right? Places like India, Sub-Saharan Africa, all of these technologies are going to come online really fast and really in an exciting way. So really the question that you have to ask is, if we know it's coming, and it is, who's going to build it, and where do we want those jobs, right? I am, and Rick, right, pretty clear that we want those in the United States, if we can get it, and then in Ohio specifically is really where we want them, and that'll only happen if companies kind of continue with this mindset of, hey, you can run away to the coast and kind of live in a place that someone else built, or you can come back to Ohio, plant your flag on the ground here and build it for yourself. And also on the investor side, I understand the attractive returns and the low risk a lot of times with investing in kind of SaaS solutions, software solutions. But at the end of the day, somebody has to make things, right? And we have a very strong history in Ohio of making things. So we have the opportunity right now, and it's only going to happen once. Like once this wave passes, it's going to pass. So do we want to be in the driver's seat for the development of energy in the kind of the energy economy in the United States and in the world, or do we not? And it's time to kind of put your money where your mouth is and have all of those jobs, all of that investment, all of the technology to be right here in Ohio.
Well, thanks, Tony. Appreciate you sharing what you're building, and glad to have you in Ohio. So thanks for moving here. Jeff, why don't you take us home?
Yes, thank you very much. Honored to be here today. Thanks for everyone's interest in Voltage Valley. Tune in. There's more happening all the time. And, I'll make a pitch for relocating here. So anyone a former resident of Northeast Ohio that migrated to Columbus, I know there's a lot of them out there. I did it myself at one point. There are plenty of opportunities, and we have an amazing cost of living and a great outdoor lifestyle. So it's a great place to be, and there's a great future ahead. And regardless, the level of collaboration we're seeing across the state is amazing. And it's really fun to feel connectivity as we take on the world, and that is Ohio takes on the world. So thanks for your time today.
Great. Well, thank you, everyone. Really appreciate everyone who's attended and is watching. Thanks to Maddie and Kyle for helping make this all possible. And Jeff, Tony, and Rick, thanks for joining us from Northeastern Ohio and sharing what's going on. And I always say it, I think Voltage Valley is one of the coolest Ohio tech stories out there. So I'm glad we were able to help tell a few new people about it. So thank you, everyone. Really appreciate your time. Hope you enjoy the sunshine today. Have a good one. Bye-bye.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Chris.
Right, stop the recording.